We want to bring in Michael Starr Hopkins. Michael Starr Hopkins, you are the founder of the John Lewis Project. I'm really glad to have you here. So before, because we've said this twice already, just tell us what exactly is the John Lewis Project?
So the John Lewis Bridge Project is an initiative to take down Edmund Pettus' name off the bridge in Selma and replace it with John Lewis's name. And we're also identifying structures all over the country that represent white supremacy and issues of racial tension, racial strife that should be taken down and replaced with more inclusive structures.
Can you just remind
what's so
people,
fascinating?
just jumping, can you just remind people of who Edmund Pettus was? Because I think we have, if you know history, you probably associate that bridge primarily with Bloody Sunday. But tell us who Pettus was and why changing the name would be so profoundly significant.
Absolutely. So Edmund Pettus was a Confederate general and a Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard. So he was a senior member of the Ku Klux Klan, someone who believed that people who looked like me, who looked like John Lewis, should still be in bondage, should still be enslaved. And so when we talk about how to best honor John Lewis, one of the ways is by putting his name on that bridge. John Lewis perpetually tried to bring this country together, not divide it like Edmund Pettus does. So when we talk about John Lewis's legacy and what he was marching for on that bridge, he was marching for voting rights. He was marching for inclusion and for every American to have their most basic right, the right to participate in government.
One of the things that I found absolutely remarkable in this discussion that we are having about statues and the renaming of streets and squares that are named after people that committed, in some cases, heinous acts, as Mr. Pettus, as head of or as a Klan member, did, are the descendants of those individuals who are aligning themselves with folks like yourself. I've spoken to descendants of Thomas Jefferson who believe that some statues of Thomas Jefferson should be removed. And now we're hearing from Caroline Randall Williams. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Edmund Pettus. She released a statement urging that the bridge be renamed after the late congressman. So the question becomes, how much weight do the descendants of some of these individuals carry in getting names changed when you have people who are not connected in any way to some of these individuals saying that the names should not be changed?
Look, it's hard to argue when the great-great-granddaughter of Edmund Pettus says that the name should come down, that the name shouldn't come down. These are people who are in the direct bloodline of these individuals saying that their ancestors are not representative of American ideals. And that's exactly true when it comes to Edmund Pettus. And I got to say, I'm so honored and proud that Caroline has decided to work with us on this and put out a statement yesterday endorsing our efforts to take down Edmund Pettus' name. So, as we have these conversations, I think it not only helps, but gives support to our efforts that Edmund Pettus' great-great-granddaughter wants the name to be taken off that bridge.
You said it would be hard to argue when the very own descendants of some of these individuals are arguing to remove their name, but people are arguing anyway. So I'm wondering what you say to those who, maybe present the argument that we're trying to erase history here or whatever it may be. What's your counter argument to them?
History has a place in society, and it's in museums. When you go to Germany, you don't see monuments to Hitler. When you go to Italy, you don't see monuments to Mussolini. That doesn't mean that Germans or Italians will ever forget the impact, the negative impact that Hitler and Mussolini had on their society. Well, the same's true here. Edmund Pettus' name doesn't need to be on that bridge for us to remember the horrific things that the Confederacy did, to remember the horrific things that the Ku Klux Klan did, and to remember the brave and historic things that the foot soldiers, including John Lewis, did when they crossed that bridge. John Lewis had his skull fractured. He thought he was going to die on that bridge, but still he marched on. Still those foot soldiers marched on. And if not for their efforts to continue to march on, I wouldn't be here. I stand in their footsteps, which is why I think it's so important to honor them.
You know, this discussion about the descendants, as you say, is such an important one, and having a descendant of Mr. Pettus aligning themselves with you is incredibly important. And yet, as Anne-Marie points out, there are some who disagree with that. I note that the descendants of former Confederate General Robert E. Lee mimic the discussions that Americans are having right now. There are some members of the Lee family who believe that statues of General Lee should remain up, and there are other members of the family who believe that they should remain down. Interestingly enough, General Lee himself did not believe that statues of himself or any remnants of his actions during the Civil War should remain up, because he said that they would relieve the wounds of war open. So the question for you is, have you spoken to members of Congress about this? As they express, you see a lot of people out there expressing their condolences for the passing of John Lewis, yet oftentimes in their policies and in their proposals are completely in opposition to all that John Lewis stood for and championed his entire life. Where do they stand on legislation like this?
Look, you hit the nail on the head. There are a lot of politicians who issued empty statements that supported John Lewis in symbolism, but when you talk about things like endorsing the Voting Rights Act, putting forth legislation to help places like Flint, issues that John Lewis dedicated his entire life to, they come up short. So I absolutely agree. Rhetoric is nice, but actions are important. And when you look at a lot of these Confederate monuments around the country, they weren't put up during the Confederacy. These were put up in 1940, 1950 as a way to intimidate a lot of the African American community and remind them of our troubled history. So, there is psychological impacts of having these statues up. And so, when I talk to people, not just all over the country, but when I reach out to people in Selma, one of the things I talk about is giving this next generation hope. Children are watching. The next generation is watching what we do. And so by taking down these monuments, by removing Edmund Pettus' name, we can show that anyone can make change. This was a project that started, a petition that started in my living room. One person deciding that their voice mattered. And then exponentially, it's grown and it's grown and it's grown. And so one person can make a difference. And I think our project is proof of that. And I hope the children of Selma will watch and take notice that they too can make change.
It's such an important message, Michael, especially given, as you pointed out, that these statues went up at a time to intimidate African Americans, to intimidate those who were fighting for equal justice under the law, and that there's been a complete rebranding, if you will, of what the Confederacy was and what the Civil War was all about. And that is essentially why we are where we are today, where people believe in a movement that lasted less than 4 years as something that has to do with the entirety of who we are as a nation. Michael, thank you so much for coming on our air. We really appreciate it.
Vlad,
thank you for having me.
Before we let Michael go,
Yeah.
Michael, for anyone who's interested in the project, how can they get more information?
Feel free to go to the johnlewisbridge.com and sign our petition, donate, and join the cause.